There's a moment that doesn't get talked about enough. The moment you realize you're not the best, not the fastest learner, not the most talented, not the one everyone points at and says they're going to make it, just average. And average is a heavy word when you're surrounded by people who look naturally gifted, people who understand things quicker, move smoother, speak more confidently, and seem like they were built for the path you're struggling to walk. I remember noticing it quietly, not in a dramatic way, no big failure, no public embarrassment, just a slow awareness that I had to work harder for things that came easier to others. They practiced less and improved faster. I practiced more and improved slower. That comparison sits with you because talent is visible, effort isn't. From the outside, it looked like they were progressing naturally, and I was just trying, and trying doesn't look impressive. Trying looks uncertain. Trying looks like you're not sure you belong yet. I started asking myself questions I didn't want to answer. What if I'm just not built for this? What if effort isn't enough? What if I'm forcing something that isn't meant for me? Those thoughts don't shout, they whisper, and whispers are dangerous because they sound reasonable. They don't feel like fear, they feel like honesty. I wasn't lazy, I wasn't careless, I just wasn't exceptional. And that realization hurts more than failure sometimes. Failure can be blamed on a mistake. Being average feels like a trait, like something fixed. I looked around and saw people who seemed born ready. Their confidence didn't look practiced. Their progress didn't look forced. And I assumed they had something internally that I was missing, a natural advantage. I started measuring myself against them constantly, not just results, identity. I compared how they spoke, how they learned, how quickly they adapted. Every comparison had the same ending. I came up short. And when you come up short enough times, you start lowering your expectations quietly. You don't announce it. You just stop expecting big things from yourself. You begin to aim safer, think smaller, dream quieter, because believing big when you feel average feels irresponsible. I didn't stop trying, but I stopped expecting recognition. I stopped assuming I'd stand out. I started telling myself that maybe this path was for people who were naturally ahead, not people who had to catch up every day. That's the dangerous part of realizing you're average. It doesn't break you instantly, it slowly shrinks you. You become careful with ambition. You become polite with your goals. You start negotiating with your own potential before the world even challenges it. And yet, something didn't let me leave. I didn't feel special. I didn't feel chosen, but I also didn't feel done. That conflict stayed inside me for a long time. On one side, logic telling me I wasn't the best. On the other, a quiet refusal to walk away just because I wasn't ahead. I realized something subtle during that phase. Being average wasn't the same as being incapable. It just meant the path might be longer, slower, less glamorous, but not closed. Still, the fear of being left behind was real. Watching others move ahead makes you question your pace. It makes you wonder if staying is bravery or denial. I didn't have the answer yet. All I knew was this: I wasn't the best, I wasn't the worst, I was just there. And sometimes, just there feels like the hardest place to stand, and because no one applauds it and no one warns you either. You're invisible. But invisibility has one hidden advantage: no expectations, no spotlight, no pressure to be extraordinary, just space. At the time, I didn't see it as an advantage. I saw it as proof that I was replaceable. Now I understand something I didn't then. Realizing you're average isn't the end of ambition. It's the beginning of honesty. And honesty is where endurance starts. Once you realize you're not naturally ahead, work feels different. Not harder in a physical way, heavier in a mental way. Because every hour you put in carries a quiet question: is this even enough? I watched people around me move forward with what looked like ease. They didn't seem to wrestle with basics the way I did. They didn't repeat the same mistakes as often. They didn't need as much time to understand things that took me days. And I wasn't jealous, I was confused. I kept wondering if effort could really compete with natural ability, if repetition could close a gap that talent opened instantly. It felt like I was always catching up, never arriving. Working without natural talent means your progress is less visible. It doesn't show up in leaps, it shows up in inches. And inches are hard to celebrate. I spent more hours practicing, more time correcting small details, more energy on things others seem to grasp quickly. From the outside, it looked like persistence. Inside, it felt like insecurity. Because when improvement is slow, doubt grows quietly. You start questioning whether you're investing in growth or just delaying the truth. The inner voice gets logical. Maybe this just isn't your strength. Maybe you're forcing something. Maybe effort has limits. Those thoughts don't sound negative, they sound practical, and practicality can become a trap. I had to make a choice during that phase. Not once, but repeatedly. Do I respect the voice telling me to stop, or do I respect the effort I've already put in? Stopping would have been easier emotionally. It would have protected me from comparison. It would have allowed me to say, I tried. But trying once isn't the same as committing. So I stayed. Not confidently, not proudly, just consistently. I stopped expecting big improvements. I stopped chasing moments of brilliance. Instead, I focused on repetition, on small corrections, on doing the same things again, slightly better. That shift wasn't exciting, it was humbling. I had to accept that my path wouldn't look impressive early, that I wouldn't be the person people pointed at and admired. I would be the person quietly working in the background, stacking small improvements no one noticed, and invisibility tests your ego. Because when no one sees your effort, you start asking yourself why you're still giving it. Recognition is motivating, silence is demanding. I learned to separate my effort from applause, not perfectly, not immediately, but gradually. I also noticed something important during this phase. People with natural talent often relied on it early, and while that gave them speed, it sometimes slowed their discipline. They didn't need structure yet. I did. I had to build systems, routines, habits, not because I was wise, but because I couldn't rely on instinct. I needed repetition to create familiarity. I needed discipline to create consistency. And discipline, once built, doesn't disappear. Talent can fluctuate. Motivation can fade. Discipline stays. Working without natural ability forced me to develop patience. I stopped expecting quick results. I stopped measuring myself daily. I started thinking in longer timelines, weeks instead of days, months instead of weeks. That mindset changed how failure felt. Instead of seeing mistakes as proof of limitation, I started seeing them as instructions. Slow progress wasn't a verdict anymore, it was data. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone. I was trying to outlast my own doubt. And that's a quieter goal, less glamorous, but more stable. I didn't suddenly become gifted. I didn't suddenly stand out. I became steady, and steadiness is underestimated because when you're steady, you don't disappear when things get difficult. You don't vanish after setbacks. You don't need constant validation to continue. You just keep showing up. Working without natural talent didn't make me exceptional. It made me durable. And durability doesn't attract attention early, but it changes everything later. There's something strange you start noticing when you stay long enough. The people you once looked up to start disappearing, not all at once, not dramatically, quietly. I remember watching people who were clearly better than me, like faster learners, sharper thinkers, more naturally skilled, slowly drift away. At first, I didn't understand it. If anyone was supposed to make it, it was them. They had the advantage I didn't. So, why were they leaving? Some said they lost interest, some found other paths, some decided it wasn't worth the effort anymore. Their reasons sounded reasonable, logical, mature, but the pattern was hard to ignore. Talent didn't guarantee staying. I used to believe that skill was the deciding factor, that the most gifted people automatically reached the end, but reality looked different. The most talented weren't always the last ones standing. The last ones standing were the ones who didn't walk away when things became repetitive, because repetition is boring, and boredom filters people faster than failure. Failure at least feels dramatic. It gives you a clear moment to react to. Boredom is quiet. It slowly drains excitement. It removes the novelty that made you start in the first place. And when excitement fades, talent alone doesn't carry you. I watched people who were ahead of me get tired of the process. They didn't lose ability, they lost patience. They expected progress to stay exciting. When it didn't, they interpreted that feeling as a sign to stop. I didn't feel ahead, so I didn't expect excitement. I didn't expect recognition either. I expected effort to feel repetitive. That expectation made staying easier, not emotionally easier, mentally easier. Because when you don't expect the journey to be thrilling, you're less disappointed when it becomes routine. Seeing more skilled people quit changed how I viewed my own position. I stopped seeing myself as behind. I started seeing myself as still here. And still here is powerful. It doesn't sound impressive, it doesn't attract attention, but it compounds. Every month I stayed, I gained familiarity. Every mistake taught me nuance. Every repetition sharpened instinct. While others reset their paths, I continued mine. I wasn't overtaking them through brilliance. I was outlasting them through tolerance. That realization was uncomfortable at first. It meant success wasn't about being extraordinary. It was about being willing to remain when things stopped feeling special. Staying is lonely. The room gets quieter. Conversations shift. The people you used to compare yourself with are no longer around. There's less competition, but also less energy. And quiet can make doubt louder. You start wondering if you're stubborn or committed, if staying is strength or denial, if persistence is courage or avoidance. But every time I thought about leaving, something stopped me. Not confidence, not pride, familiarity. I had already invested time, I already understood the process. Starting something new would mean becoming a beginner again. And beginners face the same doubt, the same repetition, the same boredom. I realized leaving wouldn't remove discomfort, it would reset it, so I stayed, and staying slowly became my advantage. I didn't notice it immediately. There was no big turning point, just small signs, things feeling easier, reactions becoming calmer, decisions becoming quicker. While others relied on natural skill, I relied on accumulated experience. They had speed early. I had endurance later. Talent can open doors. Endurance keeps you in the room. Watching better people quit didn't make me arrogant. It made me aware. Aware that ability isn't rare. Staying is. And once you understand that, your goal shifts. You stop trying to be the best in the room. You start trying to be the one who doesn't leave when the room gets quiet. Because quiet is where endurance turns into identity. And identity lasts longer than talent ever will. At some point, I stopped introducing myself to my journey with comparisons. I stopped saying, I'm not as talented as them. I stopped measuring my speed against theirs. I stopped asking whether I was ahead or behind because something else had started forming quietly. Endurance. I didn't notice it at first. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no sudden surge of confidence, just a slow realization that I had become consistent. Not impressive, not extraordinary, consistent. And consistency is a strange kind of strength because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel powerful while you're building it. It just feels repetitive, but repetition changes you. The tasks that once felt overwhelming started feeling manageable. The mistakes that once embarrassed me started looking familiar. I wasn't surprised by setbacks anymore. I expected them, and that expectation made them easier to handle. I wasn't becoming fearless. I was becoming stable. Stability is underrated because it isn't loud. It doesn't attract attention the way talent does, but stability is what allows improvement to stack without collapsing every time something goes wrong. I noticed my reactions changing. Where I once panicked, I paused. Where I once doubted, I adjusted. Where I once compared, I focused. Those shifts weren't emotional victories. They were practical ones. I wasn't trying to prove I was the best anymore. I was trying to make sure I didn't disappear, and that mindset changed my identity. I stopped seeing staying as a fallback option. I started seeing it as a capability, a real skill, something that required effort and discipline just like anything else. Because staying isn't passive. It demands patience when progress is slow. It demands humility when others move faster. It demands resilience when excitement fades. I realized that many people weren't leaving because they lacked ability. They were leaving because they lacked tolerance for the middle phase, the long stretch where nothing looks impressive and everything feels repetitive. I had built tolerance there, not intentionally, not strategically, just by not leaving. Small wins began to appear, but they weren't dramatic. They were subtle improvements, faster understanding, cleaner execution, calmer decisions, things only I could really notice. And that was enough, because those small wins built self-trust, not the kind that says, I'm amazing. The kind that says, I can handle this again. That sentence is powerful. It doesn't rely on hype. It relies on evidence. Evidence that you didn't quit last time. Evidence that you recovered before. Evidence that you can continue even when things don't go perfectly. I also stopped fearing being average. Average stopped feeling like a label and started feeling like a starting point. Because once you remove the pressure to be exceptional immediately, you give yourself room to grow naturally. I wasn't chasing recognition anymore. I was building reliability, and reliability compounds quietly. It builds competence. It builds confidence without you noticing. It builds identity without you announcing it. I began to understand something I missed earlier. Talent might give you an early lead. Staying gives you long-term leverage. Because the longer you stay, the more familiar the terrain becomes. Decisions become quicker. Adjustments become smoother. Pressure becomes manageable. You're not better than everyone. You're just harder to remove. And that's when staying stops being something you do. It becomes who you are. I didn't suddenly become the most talented person in the room. I became the person who didn't vanish when the room got quiet. And that quiet is where real capability forms. Staying didn't make me special. It made me durable. And durability turned into skill. If you feel average right now, I want you to hear this without any hype. Average is not a verdict. It's a starting position. We grow up thinking we need to be exceptional from the beginning. That talent should show early. That confidence should come naturally. And if it doesn't, maybe we're not meant for it. That idea pushes more people out than failure ever does. Because when you don't feel gifted, you start negotiating with your ambition, you aim smaller, you try quieter, you leave earlier. I know that feeling. I wasn't the fastest learner. I wasn't the most confident. I wasn't the one people expected to stand out. For a long time, I thought that meant I was behind. But I misunderstood something important. Being average doesn't mean you can't grow. It means you don't have early momentum. Momentum can be built. Talent gives you speed at the start. Staying gives you distance over time. And distance matters more. If I could speak to my younger self, the one constantly comparing, constantly questioning, constantly wondering if effort was enough, I wouldn't try to convince them they were special. I'd tell them something simpler. You don't need to be the best. You just need to not leave. Leaving early feels logical. It protects your pride, it saves you from comparison, it lets you say you tried without facing repetition. But repetition is where growth hides. No one applauds the middle phase. No one celebrates slow improvement. No one sees the quiet hours where you're just showing up without excitement. But that phase is where endurance forms. And endurance changes outcomes. People often assume success belongs to the most talented person in the room. Sometimes it does. But more often, it belongs to the one who tolerates the process long enough for improvement to compound. You don't need to outshine everyone. You need to outlast your doubt. That's a different goal. And a more achievable one. If you're listening to this and thinking, I'm not the best, that's okay. You're not supposed to be. No one starts at their peak. No one begins as the finished version of themselves. The people you admire didn't arrive fully formed, that they stayed through the awkward phase, the invisible phase, the repetitive phase. They didn't disappear when it got boring. Average doesn't disqualify you. Leaving does. You don't need extraordinary talent to continue. You need tolerance for effort. Tolerance for slow progress, tolerance for quiet days where nothing feels impressive. That tolerance is rare, and rarity creates advantage. One day people will see the result and assume you always had something special. They won't see the months or years where you simply didn't leave. They won't see the moments you almost quit but chose to stay. But you will. And that awareness builds real confidence. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, grounded confidence. Confidence that says, I can handle the process. I wasn't the best. I didn't suddenly become the most talented. I just stayed long enough for staying to turn into strength. And that's available to anyone. You don't need to be exceptional today. You don't need to feel extraordinary. You just need to remain when others walk away. Because sometimes the person who wins isn't the one who shines the brightest at the start. It's the one who refuses to disappear in the middle. And that's more than enough.